They sat me in the kitchen at my own son's wedding, the wedding I paid for down to the last white rose, the last champagne flute, the last note of the string quartet. While 200 guests raised their glasses in the ballroom I had rented, I sat on a folding chair next to dirty serving trays, watching through swinging doors as strangers celebrated what my checkbook had made possible. But that humiliation was just the beginning of a betrayal so deep it would shatter everything I thought I knew about motherhood, sacrifice, and the child I had raised as my own. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels, because what happened next will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty. The morning of Daniel's wedding, I woke up at 4 a.m. with my heart already racing, not from excitement, though God knows I should have been excited. I had been planning this day for 8 months ever since he proposed to Rebecca on that cruise I had also paid for. No, my heart was pounding because something felt wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. I stood in my walk-in closet fingertips, tracing the beaded neckline of the dress I'd chosen, a soft lavender chiffon that had taken me 3 trips to Nordstrom to find. I'd wanted something that said mother of the groom, without screaming it, something elegant enough for the photographs that would hang in their home for decades. I had no idea that in a few hours I wouldn't appear in a single one of those photographs. "You look beautiful, Margaret," I whispered to my reflection, practicing the smile I'd been rehearsing for weeks. At 58, I still had what my late husband Robert used to call my knockout smile, the one that had charmed him into marriage 27 years ago, the one that had gotten me through his funeral 3 years prior, the one that would have to carry me through watching my only child marry a woman who, frankly, I wasn't sure deserved him. But Daniel loved Rebecca, and I loved Daniel more than my own breath, so I had opened my checkbook without hesitation when they came to me with their wedding plans. $85,000. The number still made my chest tight when I thought about it. That was 3 years of Robert's pension gone in one evening. But what's money compared to your child's happiness? The phone rang at 5:30 a.m. Daniel. "Mom, thank you." His voice was thick with emotion, and I felt that familiar surge of maternal pride. "For everything. I know this wedding cost a fortune, and I know Dad would have wanted to be the one to pay for it, but—" "Sweetheart, stop." I settled back against my headboard phone, pressed to my ear like a lifeline. "Your father and I saved for this day from the moment we brought you home. This is what parents do." There was a pause. Then, "I love you, Mom. I'll see you at the church." "I love you too, baby." I should have known then. Should have heard something in his voice, a finality, a goodbye that went deeper than a son leaving for his honeymoon. But I was too busy being the perfect mother, too busy swallowing my own feelings to make room for his. The St. Catherine's Cathedral looked like something from a fairy tale. I had chosen it specifically for its soaring ceilings and stained glass windows that would photograph beautifully. The florist, recommended by Rebecca's mother, of course, had transformed the altar with cascades of white roses and baby's breath. My roses. My baby's breath, $1,800 worth of flowers that would be dead by Tuesday. I arrived early, wanting to check on the final details. The wedding coordinator, a sharp-featured woman named Lisa, who Rebecca had insisted we hire, barely glanced up from her clipboard when I approached. "Mrs. Langley, good you're here. We need to discuss seating arrangements." My stomach dropped. We had been over the seating arrangements a dozen times. I was in the front row left side along with Daniel's Uncle Mike and Aunt Sarah. Rebecca's parents were front row right with her grandmother and sister. "What about the seating arrangements?" I kept my voice level, professional. I had learned over the years that showing emotion was often interpreted as being difficult. Lisa consulted her clipboard with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. "Rebecca's family has expanded a bit. Her cousin from Seattle came in with his wife and their 2 children, and her great-aunt decided to attend after all. We're going to need to move some people around." "Okay." I waited, but she was already walking away. "Someone will let you know where you're sitting," she called over her shoulder. The first guests began arriving around 6 p.m. I positioned myself near the entrance, wanting to greet people as they came in. These were my friends, too, women from my book club neighbors I'd known for 15 years, colleagues from the law firm where I'd worked as a paralegal before Robert's death, gave me the freedom to retire early. But something strange was happening. Person after person walked past me with polite smiles, heading straight for Rebecca's mother, Diana, who stood near the altar looking resplendent in navy blue silk. "Margaret!" My friend Joyce grabbed my elbow. "Where should we sit? I didn't see your name on the programs." "Programs?" I hadn't seen the programs yet. "Let me grab one," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. The programs were beautiful, cream cardstock with gold lettering, exactly what I had envisioned. But as I scanned the text, my vision started to blur around the edges. Mr. and Mrs. William Henderson request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter, Rebecca Ann, to Daniel Robert Langley. Parents of the groom, the late Robert Langley. That was it. The late Robert Langley. As if Daniel had sprung from his father's forehead fully formed. As if I hadn't carried him in my arms through night after night of colic, hadn't taught him to ride a bike, hadn't held his hand through Robert's funeral. My hands were shaking as I read further special thanks to Mr. and Mrs. William Henderson for their generosity in making this celebration possible, their generosity. Mrs. Langley, wow. A young man in a black suit appeared at my elbow. "I'm supposed to show you to your seat." I followed him, my feet moving automatically while my brain tried to process what was happening. We walked past the front rows, past the second rows, past the third rows. We kept walking until we reached a side door marked "Staff Only." "There's been a small change in the seating plan," he said, not meeting my eyes. "They've set up a special area for you." He opened the door, and I stepped into the church's industrial kitchen. Folding chairs had been arranged in front of a small monitor, the kind of setup you'd make for overflow seating, except there was only one chair. Mine. "You'll be able to see everything perfectly from here," the young man said, his discomfort obvious. "And you'll have privacy if you get emotional." Privacy if I get emotional. I sat down on the metal folding chair, my carefully chosen dress suddenly feeling like a costume for a play where I'd forgotten my lines. Through the kitchen serving window, I could see the main sanctuary filling up with guests. My guests. People I had known for decades settling into pews while servers prepared appetizers around me. The servers were polite but confused by my presence. One of them, a teenager with kind eyes, offered me a glass of water. "Are you okay, ma'am? You look pale." "I'm the mother of the groom," I heard myself say. She looked around the kitchen, then back at me, clearly not understanding how the mother of the groom had ended up exiled to the staff area. "Would you like me to get someone?" she asked. "No, honey. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The irony of that statement would haunt me for weeks. At 7 p.m. sharp, the processional music began. Through the monitor, I watched my son take his place at the altar. He looked magnificent in his tuxedo, the one I had helped him select, the one I had paid for. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and when he smiled, I could see the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The wedding party began their walk down the aisle. Rebecca's sister as maid of honor, her 3 cousins as bridesmaids, all in the dusty rose dresses I had helped choose. Daniel's best man was his college roommate, Jake, a perfectly nice young man, though I had always thought Uncle Mike should have held that honor. Then came Rebecca, radiant in the dress we had selected together during what I had foolishly believed was a bonding moment between future daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. The dress I had paid for, $1,800 for Italian silk and hand-sewn pearls. She looked beautiful. Even in my growing rage, I had to admit that. She looked like every bride should look, glowing, confident, loved. Her father walked her down the aisle, his chest puffed with pride. At the altar, he lifted her veil and kissed her cheek, then shook Daniel's hand in the traditional gesture of giving away the bride. I watched my son marry the love of his life from a kitchen chair, surrounded by dirty serving trays and the smell of warming hors d'oeuvres. The ceremony was everything I had dreamed it would be. Father McKenna, whom I had specifically requested because he had baptized Daniel, spoke beautifully about love and commitment. Daniel's vows made me cry. He talked about wanting to build a life filled with adventure and laughter, about being grateful for the example of true love he had witnessed growing up. The example of true love he had witnessed growing up. He was talking about his father and me, but from my folding chair in the kitchen, it felt like he was talking about strangers. When Father McKenna pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation erupted in applause. Through the monitor, I watched my son kiss his bride, watched confetti fall like snow, watched 200 people celebrate the beginning of their new life together. I was not in that picture. The receiving line formed in the narthex while I sat in my kitchen exile, watching servers load champagne glasses onto silver trays. The irony was not lost on me that I could afford to buy champagne for 200 strangers, but couldn't buy my way out of a folding chair. "Excuse me, ma'am." A server was trying to get past me to the warming trays. "Could you possibly—" "Of course." I stood up, smoothing down my dress, and moved closer to the wall, out of the way, invisible. The cocktail hour began at 8 p.m. Through the serving window, I could see guests mingling in the main hall, drinking my champagne and eating my hors d'oeuvres. Laughter echoed off the cathedral's stone walls, the sound of people having the time of their lives at the party I had thrown for them. Diana Henderson, resplendent in her navy silk, was holding court near the bar. I watched women I had known for years gather around her, congratulating her on the beautiful wedding. "You've done such an amazing job," I heard Joyce say to her. "Everything is absolutely perfect." "Thank you so much," Diana replied, her smile gracious and warm. "William and I just wanted to give the kids the perfect start to their marriage." William and I sank back into my folding chair, feeling like I was watching my own life through someone else's television screen. At 9 p.m., the wedding coordinator, Lisa, who had been avoiding eye contact with me all evening, appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Mrs. Langley, they're about to do the cake cutting. I thought you might want to step out for that." Step out? Like I was a prisoner getting exercise time. I followed her into the main hall, staying close to the wall like a ghost haunting her own funeral. The wedding cake was a 3-tier masterpiece covered in sugar flowers, another detail I had approved and paid for during what I had thought was wedding planning, but was apparently just me being presented with bills. Daniel and Rebecca posed for pictures, the photographer snapping away as they laughingly attempted to feed each other cake without ruining Rebecca's makeup. They looked so happy, so young, so completely unaware that the woman who had made their joy possible was watching from the shadows like hired help. "Get the families together, Papa," the photographer called out. The Henderson family immediately assembled. Diana and William, Rebecca's sister and grandmother, various cousins and aunts I had met during the engagement period. They arranged themselves around the happy couple like they were posing for a Christmas card. I waited for someone to call for me, to wave me over, to acknowledge that Daniel had a family too. No one did. The photographer took shot after shot of the family portrait that would sit on Daniel and Rebecca's mantle for the next 50 years. In every single one, I was standing 15 feet away next to a decorative pillar, watching like a wedding guest, instead of the woman who had raised the groom. After the photos, I tried to approach Daniel. I had been patient all evening, telling myself that weddings were stressful and chaotic, that there would be time to talk later. But as I walked toward him, Rebecca's hand shot out and grabbed his arm. "Danny, we need to greet the Hutchinsons before they leave," she said, pulling him in the opposite direction. Danny. She called him Danny. I had named him Daniel after my father, and for 25 years he had been Daniel. But somewhere along the way, Rebecca had decided to remake him, starting with his name. I stood there for a moment holding my small gift, a photo album I had made with pictures from Daniel's childhood images of him and Robert fishing and playing catch, memories I wanted him to have as he started his own family. Mrs. Langley. The teenager who had offered me water earlier appeared at my elbow. I'm supposed to tell you that dinner is being served. Am I invited to dinner? The question slipped out before I could stop it, and the girl looked at me with such confusion that I immediately felt ashamed. I I assume so. You're the groom's mother, right? Right. I was the groom's mother. The woman who had loved him unconditionally for 25 years, who had sacrificed sleep and sanity and financial security to give him everything he needed to become the man who was now pretending I didn't exist. The dinner seating was a masterpiece of passive aggression. I was placed at table 12 in the back corner of the hall, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. Rebecca's college friends, it turned out, lovely young women who spent the entire meal talking about people and places I had never heard of. From my exile table, I could see the head table where Daniel sat between Rebecca and her maid of honor. Diana and William Henderson held court at table 1 directly in front of the newlyweds. The families were arranged in order of importance, and apparently I ranked somewhere between Rebecca's work colleagues and her great-aunt's bridge club. The food was delicious. Filet mignon with roasted vegetables, exactly what Daniel had requested when we met with the caterer. I had been so proud that he remembered it was his father's favorite meal, had thought it was his way of honoring Robert's memory. Now I wondered if he had simply forgotten that his father had a wife too. The speeches began during the main course. William Henderson stood first, his voice carrying easily across the room as he welcomed Daniel into their family and spoke about Rebecca's accomplishments, her MBA, her promotion at the marketing firm, her talent for bringing people together. When Rebecca first told us about Daniel, he said, raising his champagne glass, we knew immediately that he was special. Anyone who could capture our daughter's heart had to be extraordinary. Everyone laughed and applauded. Rebecca beamed. Daniel grinned and squeezed her hand. We want to thank everyone who made tonight possible. William continued, especially our family and friends who traveled from across the country to be here. This celebration wouldn't be the same without you. More applause. I waited for him to mention me to acknowledge that someone else had also made the evening possible. Instead, he sat down to thunderous clapping and kissed his wife's cheek. Then came the maid of honor's speech, then the best man's speech, then a surprise speech from Rebecca's grandmother, who told charming stories about Rebecca's childhood and made everyone laugh until they cried. No one asked me to speak. No one mentioned that the groom had a mother, or that she might have stories worth sharing, or that she had been there for every milestone in his life until this moment. I excused myself and went to the ladies' room, locking myself in a stall where I finally allowed myself to cry. Quietly, carefully, so I wouldn't smear my makeup or draw attention to myself. I was apparently very good at being invisible. When I returned to table 12, dessert was being served alongside coffee and wedding cake. The conversation had moved on to someone's recent European vacation, and no one seemed to have noticed I was gone. At 11 p.m., the DJ announced the father-daughter dance. I watched Rebecca and William take the floor to The Way You Look Tonight, a song choice I had suggested during one of our planning meetings when I still believed I was planning my son's wedding instead of paying for someone else's party. They danced beautifully together, William spinning Rebecca with the confidence of a man who had been practicing for weeks. The photographer circled them like a predator, capturing every angle of their perfect moment. When the song ended, the DJ announced the mother-son dance. Finally, it was my turn. I stood up from table 12, smoothing down my dress and checking my lipstick one more time. This was the moment I had been dreaming about since Daniel was a little boy, just the two of us on the dance floor celebrating the man he had become. The opening notes of A Mother Like You filled the air, and I started walking toward the dance floor. But as I got closer, I realized Daniel wasn't moving. He was sitting at the head table looking uncomfortable while Rebecca whispered something in his ear. The music played on, but no one was dancing. Lisa, the wedding coordinator, appeared at my elbow like a bad omen. Mrs. Langley, there's been a small change. Daniel and Rebecca decided to skip the traditional mother-son dance and go straight to the open dancing. Skip the mother-son dance. I stood there in the middle of the dance floor as couples began joining the newlyweds, my carefully planned moment evaporating like morning mist. Through the crowd, I could see Daniel dancing with Rebecca, laughing at something she had whispered in his ear. The same son who used to stand on my feet when he was 3 years old, begging me to dance with him in our living room. The same boy who had asked me to teach him to waltz before his senior prom because he wanted to impress his date. The same young man who had danced with me at Robert's funeral reception, holding me while I cried and promising that we would always have each other. I walked back to table 12 and sat down watching strangers dance to music I had paid for in a room I had rented to celebrate a love I had made possible. At midnight, the DJ announced last call at the bar. My bar. My open bar tab that would probably cost more than most people spend on a car. I had been nursing the same glass of wine for 2 hours, partly because I was driving myself home, and partly because I didn't want to appear to be drinking too much at my son's wedding. As if anyone was watching, as if anyone would have cared. The evening was winding down, and I realized with growing panic that Daniel hadn't spoken to me once. Not once. We had exchanged that phone call in the morning, but since then, nothing. No thank you for the wedding. No introduction to out-of-town relatives. No dance. No hug. No moment where he pulled me aside and said, "Mom, I know this has been crazy, but I love you and I'm grateful for everything you've done." Nothing. I decided to wait by the exit to catch him as he and Rebecca made their grand departure. Surely he would have to acknowledge me, then would have to say goodbye to the woman who had raised him. The send-off was another perfectly orchestrated moment. The wedding party had assembled outside the cathedral with sparklers, creating a tunnel of light for the happy couple to run through on their way to the honeymoon suite at the Ritz-Carlton. Another detail I had paid for, though apparently no one remembered that. I positioned myself at the end of the sparkler tunnel, my gift bag in hand, waiting for my son to reach me. Daniel and Rebecca came running through the tunnel, laughing and kissing as sparklers rained down around them. They looked like something from a movie, young and beautiful and completely in love. They reached the end of the tunnel where a hired car was waiting to take them to the hotel. Daniel helped Rebecca into the back seat, then turned to wave goodbye to the crowd. His eyes found mine for just a moment, just long enough for me to see something that made my blood freeze. Not love, not gratitude, not even basic affection. Just a flicker of annoyance, as if I was a problem he had successfully managed all evening and now needed to make disappear completely. "Goodbye, Mom," he called out, his voice carrying just far enough for people to hear that he had acknowledged me. Then he got into the car, and they drove away into their new life together. I stood there holding my gift bag full of childhood memories, while 200 people dispersed into the night, chattering about what a beautiful wedding it had been. My wedding. The wedding I had planned and paid for and been systematically erased from. Joyce appeared at my side as I watched the taillights disappear around the corner. "Margaret, honey, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I turned to look at my friend of 15 years, this woman who had attended my dinner parties and book club meetings and had held my hand at Robert's funeral. "Joyce," I said slowly, "did you thank Diana Henderson for the lovely evening?" "Of course. She did such a beautiful job with everything. You must be so proud of Rebecca for having such a wonderful family." Such a wonderful family. I handed Joyce the gift bag. "Could you make sure Daniel gets this? It's just some old photos." Then I walked to my car, got behind the wheel of the Honda Civic I had paid off 3 years early to save money for this wedding, and drove home to my empty house. It wasn't until I was standing in my kitchen at 1:30 a.m., still wearing my mother-of-the-groom dress, that the full scope of what had happened finally hit me. I had been erased. Systematically, deliberately, completely erased from my own son's wedding day. I opened my laptop and began going through the photos that guests had already started posting on social media. Photo after photo of the beautiful ceremony, the elegant reception, the happy families celebrating together. In 6 hours of photography and hundreds of images from the most important day of my son's life, I appeared in exactly 3 photos. In one, I was barely visible in the background of a group shot. In another, I was caught mid-step walking toward the ladies' room. In the third, I was sitting alone at table 12 looking lost and forgotten, the mother of the groom rendered invisible at her own son's wedding. But as I sat there in my kitchen at 2 a.m. scrolling through images of my own erasure, I realized that the wedding was just the symptom. The real disease was deeper, more devastating than I had allowed myself to acknowledge. Somewhere along the way, I had lost my son, not to death or distance or even normal growing up. I had lost him to people who understood something. I was only beginning to learn that love without boundaries is just another word for exploitation. I had given Daniel everything, my time, my money, my energy, my complete devotion. And in return, he had given me a folding chair in a kitchen and a 2-word goodbye. The worst part wasn't the humiliation, though, that burned like acid in my chest. The worst part was the creeping realization that this hadn't happened overnight. This had been building for months, maybe years, and I had been too busy being the perfect mother to notice that perfect mothers apparently were meant to be invisible. As I finally climbed the stairs to my bedroom, still wearing the dress I had chosen so carefully for a day that had destroyed me, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being invisible. I was done being the perfect mother who absorbed every slight, every dismissal, every betrayal with a smile and a checkbook. Tomorrow I was going to find out exactly how much my love had cost me, and then I was going to send Daniel an itemized bill. But first I was going to pour myself a real drink and toast the death of the woman who had raised an ungrateful stranger and called it motherhood. The woman in the lavender chiffon dress was gone forever. What would rise from her ashes was something Rebecca and Daniel had never encountered before, a mother who had finally learned the difference between love and martyrdom, and they were about to get a very expensive education. The ice cubes clinked against the crystal tumbler as I poured myself 3 fingers of the 18-year-old Macallan that Robert had been saving for a special occasion. Well, tonight felt special enough. It was the night I finally saw my son for who he really was. I sat at my kitchen table, still in that damned lavender dress, and opened my laptop. The bourbon burned my throat in the most satisfying way as I navigated to my online banking. If I was going to confront Daniel, I needed ammunition, and nothing spoke louder than numbers. The wedding expenses stretched back 8 months, a paper trail of maternal devotion that read like a financial suicide note. Venue rental $12,000, catering $18,500, photography $4,200, flowers I own $800. The dress Rebecca wore down the aisle $1,800. The band that played while I sat in the kitchen $2,500. Every line item was a memory, a moment when I had said yes without question because Daniel had asked. The engagement party I threw at the country club, $3,200. The bridal shower Rebecca's friends organized, but somehow I ended up paying for $2,400. The rehearsal dinner, $2,800. My fingers moved across the keyboard like a court stenographer documenting my own financial execution. By 3 a.m., I had compiled a spreadsheet that would have made my old law firm proud. Total damage $87,340. $87,340. Nearly 3 years of Robert's military pension gone in 8 months to celebrate the union of two people who couldn't be bothered to acknowledge I existed. But the numbers told a deeper story than mere wedding expenses. There were the loans Daniel had asked for over the past 5 years, money for his apartment deposit car repairs, that investment opportunity with his college friend that never materialized, money I had given freely, lovingly, without any expectation of repayment, because that's what mothers do. Except I was apparently the only one who didn't get that memo about what mothers do, because what mothers don't do, apparently, is get thanked or acknowledged or treated with basic human decency at their son's wedding. The bourbon was making me philosophical, but it was also making me clear-headed in a way I hadn't been in years. I pulled up my credit card statements next, searching for a particular transaction that had been nagging at me for weeks. There it was, March 15th, a charge for $2,800 to Bella Vista Restaurant and Events. I had never been to Bella Vista, had never even heard of it, but my credit card had apparently been there along with someone who knew my PIN. I called the number on my statement knowing they wouldn't be open at 3:30 a.m., but needing to hear my own voice say the words that were forming in my mind. Hi, you've reached Bella Vista Restaurant. We're currently closed, but if you're calling about our private event services, please leave a detailed message and we'll get back to you within one business day. I hung up and stared at the charge. $2,800. For what? When and why was this the first I was hearing about it? My phone buzzed with a text message. Daniel. Even in my bourbon-soaked state, my heart jumped. Maybe he was calling to thank me, to apologize for how the evening had gone, to acknowledge what I had done for him. Mom, thanks again for everything tonight. We're at the hotel and just wanted you to know we appreciated all your help. We'll call when we get back from Hawaii. Love you. Help. He called my financial devastation help. Like I was a wedding planner he had hired, not the woman who had loved him since the day he came into my life. I started to type back something gracious, something motherly, something that would preserve the peace and maintain the fiction that everything was fine. Then I deleted it and typed something else. Daniel, we need to talk. Call me when you get back from your honeymoon. I sent it before I could change my mind, then immediately regretted it. The last thing I wanted was to be the bitter mother-in-law who couldn't let her son be happy. Except I wasn't bitter about his happiness. I was devastated by my own erasure. The next morning arrived with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer to my skull. The bourbon had seemed like such a good idea at 3 a.m., but at 8 a.m. it felt like divine punishment for the sin of self-pity. I shuffled to the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's dress like some pathetic Miss Havisham, and started a pot of coffee strong enough to raise the dead. My phone had been buzzing all morning with text messages from friends who had attended the wedding. Sweet messages mostly telling me how beautiful everything was, how proud I must be, how lucky Daniel was to have such a devoted mother, if only they knew. Joyce had texted 3 times. Call me when you're up, honey. I have some things to tell you about last night. That sounded ominous enough to warrant immediate attention, hangover or no hangover. Margaret. Joyce's voice was bright with artificial cheer, the tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news. How are you feeling this morning? Like I've been hit by a truck full of wedding cake. What did you want to tell me? There was a pause, the kind of pregnant silence that precedes life-altering information. Honey, I don't want to upset you, but there are some things you need to know about last night. Can I come over? 20 minutes later, Joyce sat across from me at my kitchen table, her usually cheerful face creased with concern. She had brought coffee from that expensive place downtown, the kind that cost $12 and tasted like absolution. Margaret, how long have you known Rebecca? About 2 years, since Daniel started dating her seriously. Why? Joyce fidgeted with her coffee cup, not meeting my eyes. Did you know she was married before? The coffee turned to ash in my mouth. What? Divorced, actually. About 3 years ago. I was talking to my cousin Linda. You remember Linda? She works at the courthouse. And she mentioned seeing Rebecca's name on some divorce proceedings a while back. I didn't think much of it at the time, but then last night what? I overheard Diana Henderson talking to her sister. They were discussing how relieved they were that Rebecca had found someone stable this time after what happened with Marcus. Margaret, they were talking about Rebecca's first husband. The room started spinning slightly, and I wasn't sure if it was the hangover or the revelation. Daniel never mentioned any of this. I don't think Daniel knows. That stopped my spiraling thoughts cold. What do you mean? Joyce leaned forward, lowering her voice as if we were conspirators. I mean, I don't think Rebecca told him about her first marriage, and from what I overheard, it ended badly. Something about financial problems and Marcus leaving her with a lot of debt. Financial problems. Debt. Suddenly, Rebecca's enthusiasm for an expensive wedding made a different kind of sense. Not romance, but recovery. Not love, but economic necessity. There's more, Joyce continued, her voice gentler now. I also heard Diana talking about how generous you've been, how you've really stepped up financially, but she was saying it like they expected it, like it was your obligation, not your gift. I set my coffee down before I could throw it against the wall. They planned this. What do you mean? The pieces were falling into place with nauseating clarity. They planned for me to pay for everything. Rebecca targeted Daniel specifically because she knew he had a mother who would open her checkbook. This whole thing was a setup. Joyce looked skeptical. Margaret, don't you think that's a little paranoid? Is it, Joyce? I spent nearly $90,000 on that wedding and they stuck me in the kitchen. That's not oversight, that's strategy. They needed my money, but they didn't need me. Before Joyce could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID made my blood pressure spike. Bella Vista Restaurant. Mrs. Langley, this is Maria from Bella Vista. You left a message about charges on your credit card. I put the phone on speaker so Joyce could hear. Yes, I have a charge from March 15th that I don't recognize. Oh yes, that was for the Henderson party. Beautiful event. We did a brunch for about 40 people. Is there a problem with the billing? The Henderson party, not the Langley party. The Henderson party. Can you tell me who made the reservation? Let me check. It was made by Rebecca Henderson. Well, she's Rebecca Langley now, isn't she? She just got married yesterday. Such a lovely girl. Rebecca Henderson, using her maiden name, using my credit card, throwing a party I knew nothing about. And she paid with my credit card. Yes, she had all your information, said it was a surprise party and you wanted to keep it hush-hush. We get a lot of those. Surprise parties, surprise anniversary celebrations. Very sweet of you to do that for your future daughter-in-law. Very sweet indeed. I thanked Maria and hung up, staring at Joyce with what must have been a terrifying expression. She stole my credit card information. Margaret, no, Joyce, listen to me. She threw herself a pre-wedding party and charged it to my card without asking. That's theft. That's fraud. Joyce was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, she spoke. What are you going to do? What was I going to do? The woman who had spent 25 years being the perfect mother, who had swallowed every disappointment and absorbed every slight with a smile and a check, was being asked what she was going to do about being systematically robbed and humiliated by her own family. I'm going to find out exactly how much money they've stolen from me, and then I'm going to get every penny back. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls and paperwork. I contacted every vendor, every service provider, every person who had been paid with my money to create Rebecca and Daniel's perfect day. I wasn't just gathering evidence, I was building a case. The florist remembered Rebecca coming in alone to upgrade the arrangements, authorizing an additional $600 in charges to my account. The photographer had been contacted directly by Rebecca to add an engagement session that I never knew about, another $800. The band had been asked to extend their playing time with Rebecca, assuring them that Mrs. Langley said money was no object. Money was no object. Apparently, that had become Rebecca's catchphrase when discussing my finances. But the most devastating discovery came from the wedding coordinator, Lisa. When I called to ask about the seating arrangements, her professional demeanor cracked slightly. Mrs. Langley, I have to be honest with you. I was very uncomfortable with those arrangements. In 30 years of coordinating weddings, I've never seated the mother of the groom in the kitchen. Then why did you do it? Because Mrs. Henderson, Rebecca, insisted. She said you preferred privacy, that you got emotional at public events and didn't want to cause a scene. She made it sound like we were doing you a favor. Rebecca had told them I was unstable, that I couldn't be trusted in public, that I needed to be hidden away like a shameful family secret. She also mentioned that you had some financial difficulties and that the Hendersons were actually paying for most of the wedding. She said you were sensitive about it and didn't want anyone to know you couldn't afford it. The room went white around the edges. Rebecca had told everyone that I was broke, that the Hendersons were the real benefactors, that I was some pathetic charity case they were helping out of the goodness of their hearts. Mrs. Langley, are you still there? I'm here. Lisa, I have copies of every check I wrote, every credit card charge, every payment I made for that wedding. I paid for everything, every single thing. There was a long silence. Then, oh my God, Mrs. Langley, I am so sorry. If I had known, I would never have agreed to those seating arrangements. Never. Too little, too late, but at least I wasn't going completely insane. By Thursday, I had a complete picture of the systematic theft and humiliation that had been perpetrated against me. The total stolen through unauthorized charges and fraudulent upgrades was $8,400. But the real crime wasn't financial, it was personal. They had stolen my dignity, my role as Daniel's mother, my place in his life. Thursday evening, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Daniel standing on my porch, looking uncomfortable and slightly angry. Rebecca was beside him, her face a mask of wounded innocence. Mom, we need to talk. I stepped aside to let them in, noticing how Rebecca's eyes immediately began cataloging my furnishings, my artwork, my possessions, calculating, always calculating. I got your text. Daniel continued, settling onto my couch like he owned the place. You said we needed to talk. What's this about? I had spent 3 days preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, I felt strangely calm. I walked to my desk and pulled out the folder I had prepared. Copies of credit card statements, bank records, vendor receipts, everything documented in neat chronological order. This is about theft, I said, setting the folder on the coffee table between us. Rebecca's face went white, but Daniel just looked confused. What are you talking about, Mom? I'm talking about the $8,400 that your wife stole from me by using my credit card without permission. I'm talking about the lies she told vendors about who was paying for your wedding. I'm talking about the fiction she created that positioned her family as the generous benefactors while I was portrayed as some broke, unstable woman who needed to be hidden in the kitchen. Daniel picked up the folder and started flipping through the documents. His expression changed slowly from confusion to disbelief to something that looked almost like panic. Rebecca, what is this, Mom? There must be some mistake. The only mistake, I said, my voice steady as a surgeon's scalpel, was trusting either of you. Rebecca finally spoke, her voice trembling with perfectly calibrated emotion. Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was trying to help to take some of the pressure off you. I thought you thought I'd appreciate being seated in the kitchen at my own son's wedding. That wasn't my decision. The venue coordinator said there were space issues, so I spoke to Lisa. She told me exactly whose decision it was. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel continued reading through the documentation, his face growing paler with each page. Rebecca sat frozen beside him, her mask of innocence finally slipping to reveal the calculating woman underneath. Daniel, I said quietly, do you remember what you told me on the phone the morning of your wedding? You said your father would have wanted to pay for this day if he were still alive. He looked up from the papers, his eyes meeting mine for the first time since he'd arrived. You were right. Your father would have paid for your wedding, but he would have been in the front row watching his son get married, not exiled to a kitchen, while strangers took credit for his generosity. He would have danced with you, would have given a speech, would have been acknowledged as your family. My voice broke slightly on the last word, but I pushed through. Your father loved you, Daniel, but he also respected me. He would never have allowed anyone to treat me the way you and your wife treated me last Saturday. Daniel set the folder down, his hands shaking slightly. Mom, I didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. Rebecca finally found her voice again, switching tactics from innocent victim to righteous indignation. Margaret, I think you're overreacting. Weddings are stressful for everyone, and maybe some things got confused, but to accuse me of theft, I'm not accusing you of theft, Rebecca. I'm stating a fact. You used my credit card without permission to pay for events I never authorized. That's the legal definition of fraud. I was trying to help plan a surprise brunch for 40 people that I wasn't invited to, a surprise engagement session that I didn't know about, a surprise upgrade to the flowers that you authorized. In my name, each question hit like a physical blow, and I could see Rebecca scrambling for explanations that might make sense. Daniel, she said, turning to her husband with desperate eyes. You know I would never do anything malicious. Tell her. But Daniel wasn't looking at his wife anymore. He was staring at me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a child caught in a lie. Mom, he said slowly, I swear I didn't know about the credit card charges, but the seating arrangement, I knew about that. The room went completely silent. You knew I was in the kitchen. Rebecca said you preferred it. She said you got anxious at big events and would be more comfortable somewhere quiet. And you believed her. She knows you better than I thought she did. She said you'd mentioned it to her during one of your shopping trips. Rebecca's eyes went wide. She hadn't expected Daniel to throw her under the bus quite so thoroughly. I never said any such thing. I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Rebecca, when exactly did I tell you I preferred to be hidden in kitchens during important family events? The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air, but no sound came out. Daniel was looking back and forth between us, finally beginning to understand the scope of what had happened. She lied to me, he said, more to himself than to us. She lied to everyone, I confirmed. The vendors think her family paid for your wedding. The guests think I was just a helper who needed to be managed. Your wife has systematically erased me from your wedding and your life, and you let her do it. Daniel stood up abruptly, pacing to my window and back. This is insane. Rebecca, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't plan this. Rebecca finally broke down, tears streaming down her face in what was either genuine remorse or excellent acting. I was trying to make everything perfect. Your mother is so intense about everything, and I just wanted our day to be about us, not about managing everyone's feelings and egos. So you stole from her. I borrowed. I was going to pay her back. With what money, Rebecca, though? I asked quietly. You're unemployed. You quit your job 3 months ago to plan the wedding that I paid for. Daniel spun around. You quit your job when you told me you were taking vacation time. The lies were unraveling faster than Rebecca could weave new ones. She sat on my couch crying into her hands while her husband of 5 days stared at her like she was a stranger. I was going to tell you, she sobbed. After the honeymoon, I thought maybe I could start my own event planning business, use our wedding as a portfolio piece. Our wedding that my mother paid for. I was going to pay her back. How? Daniel's voice was rising now, all pretense of calm abandoned. How are you going to pay back $90,000 without a job? Your mother has plenty of money. She lives in this huge house all by herself. She gets your dad's pension. She doesn't need... Stop. My voice cut through her babbling like a knife. Just stop. I walked to my desk and pulled out one more document, the one I had been saving for last. You want to talk about what I have, Rebecca? You want to discuss my financial situation? Let's do that. I handed her a copy of my mortgage statement. I refinanced my house to pay for your wedding. This house that I've lived in for 22 years that contains every memory I have of my life with Robert and Daniel, I borrowed against it to give you your perfect day. Daniel sank back onto the couch like I had punched him in the stomach. The pension you mentioned, it's $800 a month. That's what I live on. Your wedding cost me nearly 4 years of income, and I was happy to spend it because I thought I was celebrating my son's happiness. I pulled out one more paper, a letter from my financial advisor. If I don't pay back the equity loan within 2 years, I'll lose this house. The house where your father and I brought you home from the hospital. The house where you learned to walk, where you had birthday parties, where you recovered from chicken pox and broken hearts and every disappointment life threw at you. Daniel's face had gone completely gray. Mom, I didn't know. You didn't ask. Neither of you asked what this was costing me. You just assumed I could afford it because that's what mothers do, right? We sacrifice everything for our children, and we're supposed to be grateful for the opportunity. Rebecca was still crying, but quietly now, all fight gone out of her. I want my money back, I said simply. All of it. Every unauthorized charge, every upgrade I didn't approve, every penny you spent that wasn't yours to spend. We don't have it, Daniel whispered. Then you'll get it. You'll sell the wedding gifts, you'll take out loans, you'll get jobs and work extra shifts until every dollar is returned to me. Mom, please. No, Daniel. The woman who would have said, "Please don't worry about it, honey," died last Saturday night in a church kitchen. The woman standing here now expects to be repaid for services rendered. I walked to my front door and opened it, the universal signal that this conversation was over. You have 30 days to return the stolen money. After that, I'm filing charges for fraud and taking you to court for the rest. Rebecca stumbled toward the door, still sniffling, but Daniel didn't move. Mom, what about us? What about our relationship? I looked at my son, this man I had loved more than my own life, more than my own security, more than my own dignity, and felt something inside me finally break free. What relationship, Daniel? The one where I give everything and you take it without question, the one where I'm supposed to be grateful for scraps of your attention, the one where your wife can steal from me and humiliate me, and you think it's my responsibility to understand and forgive. He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up my hand. I love you. I will always love you. But I'm done being invisible in your life. I'm done being the backup plan, the emergency fund, the woman who exists solely to make everyone else's dreams come true. Daniel finally stood and walked toward the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I know you are, sweetheart, but sorry doesn't pay mortgages. After they left, I poured myself another bourbon and sat in my living room surrounded by 25 years of photographs showing a happy family that apparently never really existed. Tomorrow I would start the process of legally recovering my money. I would document every theft, pursue every remedy available to me under the law. But tonight I was going to grieve the death of the woman who had believed that love was supposed to be unconditional, that mothers were supposed to give until it killed them, that family meant never having to say you're sorry because forgiveness was automatic. That woman was gone forever. And despite everything, I was beginning to think that might be the best thing that had ever happened to me. The bourbon glass sat empty on my coffee table as I stared at the photographs scattered around my living room floor. 25 years of memories lay spread out like evidence in a crime scene, and in a way that's exactly what they were. Evidence of a crime so subtle, so perfectly executed, that even the victim hadn't realized she was being robbed until the thieves had already made off with everything. I picked up a photo from Daniel's high school graduation, me beaming beside him in his cap and gown, my arm around his shoulders, like I owned the moment. Because I had owned it. I had earned every second of his achievements through sleepless nights, helping with homework, driving him to activities, believing in him when he didn't believe in himself. When had that changed? When had I gone from being the proud mother standing beside her son to the embarrassment hiding in the kitchen? My phone had been buzzing steadily since Daniel and Rebecca left, but I ignored it. Let them panic. Let them scramble to figure out how to return money they had already spent on their new life together. Let them finally experience the consequences of treating someone's love like a limitless bank account. But around midnight, the buzzing became so insistent that I finally looked at the screen. 17 missed calls from Daniel, 12 text messages, and 3 voicemails. Against my better judgment, I played the first voicemail. Mom, please call me back. I know you're angry, but we need to talk about this. There has to be another way to work this out. Another way. Of course there was another way. The old way where I absorbed their betrayal with a smile and pretended it didn't matter. where I made their problems disappear with my checkbook and my silence. The second voicemail was Rebecca, her voice thick with tears. Margaret, I know I made mistakes, but please don't destroy our marriage over this. Daniel loves you so much, and I was just trying to make everything perfect. Can we please meet for coffee and talk about this like adults? Like adults. The woman who had stolen my credit card information and orchestrated my humiliation wanted to discuss adult behavior. The third voicemail was Daniel again, and this time his voice carried an edge of desperation that made my chest tight. Mom, Rebecca's having panic attacks. She can't breathe. She's throwing up. She thinks you're going to have us arrested. I know she's screwed up, but she's my wife now. I have to protect her. Please call me back. I set the phone down and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the garden Robert and I had planted together 15 years ago. The roses were blooming despite the late season, their petals blood red in the moonlight. Robert used to say that roses were like people. They needed strong roots and careful tending to produce something beautiful. But what happened when the gardener gave everything to the roses and forgot to tend her own soil? The next morning brought gray skies and a pounding headache that felt like divine punishment for my bourbon consumption. I was sitting at my kitchen table with coffee and regret when someone knocked on my front door. Not the doorbell, a soft, hesitant knock that suggested the visitor wasn't entirely sure they wanted to be there. I opened the door to find a woman I didn't recognize, probably in her early 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes that looked remarkably familiar. Mrs. Langley, my name is Patricia Morrison. I'm Rebecca's aunt. My first instinct was to slam the door. The last thing I needed was another Henderson family member coming to lecture me about forgiveness and understanding. But something in her expression stopped me as she looked as uncomfortable as I felt. I'm sorry to bother you, she continued when I didn't respond, but I think there are some things you need to know about my niece. Against my better judgment, I invited her in. Patricia Morrison settled into my living room with the careful movements of someone carrying heavy information. I want to start by saying that what Rebecca did to you was unforgivable, she said without preamble. I was at the wedding. I saw where they put you. I've been sick about it ever since. This was not what I had expected. Then why didn't you say something? Patricia's smile was sad and knowing. Because I've learned the hard way that speaking up about Rebecca's behavior only makes you a target for her next manipulation. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, setting it on my coffee table like it contained explosives. Mrs. Langley, Rebecca has done this before. The expensive wedding funded by someone else's sacrifice, the lies about who's really paying, the systematic exclusion of anyone who might interfere with her narrative. You weren't her first victim. My coffee cup rattled against the saucer as I set it down. What do you mean? Rebecca was married before. Marcus Thompson, a lovely man from a good family. His parents paid for an even more expensive wedding than yours, over $100,000. And just like with you, they were gradually pushed out of the picture until they were barely acknowledged as family. The envelope seemed to pulse with malevolent energy on my coffee table. What happened to them? Marcus divorced Rebecca after 2 years when he discovered she had been stealing from his business accounts and running up credit card debt in his name. His parents lost their retirement savings trying to keep him out of bankruptcy. Last I heard, they were living in a one-bedroom apartment in Phoenix, working part-time jobs in their 70s. I felt like I was falling down a well. Daniel doesn't know any of this. Of course not. Rebecca is very good at reinventing herself for each new mark. She's been engaged 4 times that I know of, married twice. Each time she finds a man with a financially stable family and slowly works her way into their wallets. Patricia leaned forward, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Mrs. Langley, there's something else you need to know. Rebecca researched your family extensively before she ever met Daniel. She knew about your husband's death, your insurance settlement, the value of this house. She targeted your son specifically because she knew you'd be vulnerable after losing your husband. The room started spinning slightly. How do you know all this? because she tried to borrow money from me 6 months ago. When I refused, she got drunk at my daughter's birthday party and told me exactly how she'd landed the perfect mark. A widowed mother with money and a son who was desperate to prove his masculinity after losing his father figure. Those words hit me like physical blows. Daniel wasn't Rebecca's beloved husband. He was her latest business opportunity, and I wasn't his mother's. I was the funding source that made the opportunity profitable. Patricia opened the envelope and spread out photographs, documents, printouts of social media posts, evidence of Rebecca's pattern of financial predation stretching back 5 years. "This is Marcus," she said, pointing to a wedding photo remarkably similar to Daniel's. Rebecca in white, Marcus in his tuxedo, and his parents nowhere to be seen in the family photos. Sound familiar, though. It sounded like a nightmare I was still living. "And this is James Patterson. Engagement number 3. She was with him for 8 months before his mother caught her stealing jewelry from their house. They called off the wedding, but not before Rebecca had charged $15,000 in wedding planning expenses to his credit cards." Photo after photo, document after document, a portfolio of systematic emotional and financial abuse that Rebecca had been perfecting for years. "Why are you showing me this, Val?" I asked, though I thought I knew the answer. "Because Rebecca is pregnant." The world stopped, completely stopped. "She's what? 3 months. She told my sister Diana last week, swore her to secrecy until after the honeymoon, but Diana can't keep secrets, especially when she's had wine. Pregnant. Rebecca was pregnant with Daniel's child, which meant she wasn't going anywhere, which meant this nightmare was just beginning. Mrs. Langley, I know this is overwhelming, but you need to understand what you're dealing with. Rebecca isn't going to disappear or get a job or magically start paying you back. She's going to double down. She's going to use that baby to guilt Daniel into cutting you out of their lives completely if you don't stop demanding accountability." I stared at the photographs spread across my coffee table. Years of Rebecca's victims, all of them destroyed by their own generosity and love. "What am I supposed to do with this information?" Patricia began, gathering up the documents, her movements efficient and purposeful. "That's up to you. But I will say this. Every family that tried to work things out with Rebecca ended up losing everything. The ones who fought back, who demanded legal consequences, who refused to be victims, they at least saved themselves from complete destruction." After she left, I sat alone with the most devastating knowledge a mother can possess, that her child had been manipulated into a relationship that would destroy him financially, emotionally, and psychologically, and that any attempt to save him would be painted as jealousy, interference, or inability to let go. But there was something else Patricia had left with me, something she hadn't said explicitly but was implied in every document, every photograph, every story of Rebecca's previous victims. A baby changed everything, but it also revealed everything. If Rebecca was pregnant, then her timeline for extracting maximum financial benefit from Daniel's family had just accelerated dramatically. Pregnant women needed medical care, maternity clothes, baby furniture, college funds. Pregnant women also couldn't work, couldn't contribute financially, couldn't be expected to pay back debts to bitter mothers-in-law who just couldn't accept the new reality. I called my lawyer. Sandra Kellerman had been handling my legal affairs since Robert's death, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had built her career on helping widows navigate the financial aftermath of loss. She listened to my story without interruption, occasionally making notes, her expression growing more grim with each detail I provided. "Margaret, what you're describing is a clear case of identity theft and fraud. The unauthorized credit card charges alone are enough for criminal prosecution." "But she's pregnant, Sandra, and she's married to my son." Sandra's pen stopped moving. "Are you telling me you want to drop this because she's pregnant?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Was I going to let biology trump justice? Was I going to sacrifice my financial security and my dignity because Rebecca had managed to trap Daniel with a pregnancy. I'm telling you, I need to understand all my options before that baby arrives and makes everything infinitely more complicated. Fair enough. Here's what I recommend. We file a civil suit immediately for the return of all fraudulent charges, plus interest and legal fees. We also file a police report for the identity theft. Let law enforcement decide whether criminal charges are warranted. What about Daniel? What about him? He's an adult who married a woman without doing his due diligence. That's not your responsibility to fix. But it felt like my responsibility. 25 years of motherhood couldn't be erased by a lawyer's practical advice. Sandra, if I do this, I'll probably lose my relationship with my son permanently. Sandra set down her pen and looked at me with the expression of someone who had seen too many good women destroy themselves trying to save ungrateful family members. Margaret, what relationship? The one where you pay for everything and get nothing in return, the one where your own family treats you like hired help, the one where your love is measured by the size of your checkbook. She was right, but that didn't make it hurt less. I need some time to think about this. You have time, but not much. Every day you wait is another day for them to spend money they don't have, accumulate debts they can't pay, and dig themselves deeper into a hole that you'll be expected to fill. I drove home through streets that looked different somehow, like I was seeing my own neighborhood through strangers' eyes. The houses seemed smaller, the trees more fragile, everything touched with the vulnerability that comes from realizing how quickly your entire life can be upended by people you trust. My phone was ringing as I walked through my front door. Daniel again. This time I answered. Mom, thank God, we need to talk. I'm listening. Rebecca told me about the baby. Of course she had. The nuclear option deployed at exactly the right moment to maximum emotional effect. Congratulations. The word tasted like ashes. Mom, everything changes now. We're going to be a family, and we need to figure out how to move forward together. Together. As if the last week had never happened, as if I hadn't been systematically robbed and humiliated, as if pregnancy was a magic wand that erased all sins. Daniel, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Did you know Rebecca was pregnant when you got married? There was a pause that lasted just long enough to answer the question. She suspected, but we didn't know for sure. So you got married knowing she might be pregnant, but you didn't think to mention this to me even when I was writing check after check to pay for your wedding. Mom, it wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. You knew there was a possibility that Rebecca was carrying your child, which means you knew there was a possibility that I was paying for a wedding that was more about legitimizing a pregnancy than celebrating a love story. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Daniel, let me tell you what's not fair. What's not fair is discovering that your daughter-in-law is a career con artist who has been systematically destroying families for years. What's not fair is learning that my son was targeted specifically because his mother was a vulnerable widow with money. What are you talking about? I told him about Patricia Morrison's visit, about Rebecca's pattern of financial predation, about the previous marriages and engagements that had ended in financial ruin for the families involved. I watched my son's world crumble through the phone line as each detail landed like a physical blow. That can't be true, he whispered when I finished. Your aunt-in-law brought documentation, Daniel. Photos, court records, credit reports. Your wife is a professional victim who specializes in bleeding families dry. But she's pregnant with my child. Yes, she is. And that baby deserves better than parents who built their marriage on lies and theft. There was a long silence. Then Daniel's voice, smaller and more broken than I had heard since he was a child. Mom, what am I supposed to do? For the first time in a week, I heard my son asking for help instead of demanding compliance. And for the first time in 25 years of motherhood, I didn't immediately offer to fix his problems. I don't know, sweetheart, but I do know what I'm going to do. What? I'm going to file charges against Rebecca for identity theft and fraud. I'm going to sue for the return of every penny she stole from me. And I'm going to make sure that everyone who needs to know the truth about your wife understands exactly who they're dealing with. Mom, please, if you do this, it will destroy us. Daniel, you're already destroyed. You just don't know it yet. The only question is whether you're going to take me down with you. I hung up the phone and immediately called Sandra Kellerman back. Sandra, it's Margaret. I've made my decision. File everything, all of it. I want Rebecca Henderson Langley prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Are you sure about this, Margaret? I thought about Patricia Morrison's photographs, about Marcus Thompson's parents, working part-time jobs in their 70s, about the pattern of destruction that Rebecca left in her wake. I thought about the baby growing inside Rebecca's body, a child who would be born into a world of lies and manipulation, unless someone was brave enough to break the cycle. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in months. For the first time since Robert's death, I had a sense of purpose that wasn't centered around sacrificing myself for ungrateful family members. I was going to fight back. I was going to demand justice. I was going to stop being a victim. But first, I was going to do something I should have done months ago. I drove to Greenwood Cemetery, to the section where Robert was buried under a simple granite headstone that read, "Beloved Husband and Father." I had visited regularly for the first year after his death, but the trips had become less frequent as Daniel's needs became more demanding. I sat cross-legged on the grass beside Robert's grave, something I hadn't done since I was young enough for such positions to be comfortable. "I'm sorry I haven't been here in so long," I said to the headstone. "I've been busy being taken advantage of by our son." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, but also liberating. For 3 years, I had idealized my marriage to Robert, had convinced myself that he would have wanted me to give Daniel everything without question. But sitting there in the morning sun, I remembered a different Robert, the man who had insisted on teaching Daniel responsibility, who had made him get a job in high school, who had refused to bail him out of minor scrapes because that boy needs to learn that actions have consequences. Robert would have been appalled by what Daniel had become. More than that, he would have been furious about how Daniel had allowed his wife to treat me. "I think I lost myself when you died," I told the headstone. "I thought being a good mother meant being a doormat, but you never raised me to be anyone's doormat." A breeze stirred the trees overhead, rustling the leaves in a way that sounded almost like approval. "I'm going to fight back, Robert. I'm going to stop letting people walk all over me just because I love them. I think you'd be proud of that." I stayed there for an hour, not talking, just sitting in the presence of the man who had loved me enough to marry me, to build a life with me, to trust me with raising his son. The man who had never once asked me to make myself smaller so that he could feel bigger. When I finally stood to leave, I felt like I was saying goodbye to more than just Robert's grave. I was saying goodbye to the woman who had died with him 3 years ago, the woman who had believed that love meant endless sacrifice without reciprocal respect. That afternoon, Sandra called with news that the police had agreed to investigate Rebecca for identity theft and fraud. The civil suit would be filed by the end of the week. The legal machinery was in motion, and there was no stopping it now. But the real test came that evening when Daniel showed up at my door again, this time alone. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "Mom, can I come in?" I stepped aside and he collapsed onto my couch like a man who had been carrying the world on his shoulders. I left her. The words hung in the air between us like a confession. I went home and demanded to see her phone, her computer, everything. She tried to refuse, said I was being paranoid and controlling, but I kept pushing, and finally she broke down and admitted that most of what you said was true. I sat down across from him, afraid to hope, afraid to believe that my son might finally be seeing clearly. Most of what I said. She admits she used your credit card without permission. She admits she lied about the seating arrangements and told people you were unstable. She admits she researched our family before she ever met me. Each admission felt like a small victory, but Daniel's expression suggested there was more. But she swears the other stuff isn't true. She says Patricia Morrison is lying about the previous marriages, that she's never been married before, that her aunt is trying to sabotage her because of some family feud. Of course she did. Daniel Patricia showed me court documents, divorce decrees, credit reports. That's not the kind of evidence you can fake. I know. That's why I hired a private investigator. This surprised me. You did what? I hired someone to do a background check on Rebecca. A real one, not just the basic stuff you get when you're dating someone. I should have done it months ago, but I was in love and stupid and I trusted her. When will you know something? He's supposed to call me tomorrow with the preliminary findings. But Mom, even if everything Patricia said is true, even if Rebecca has been lying about everything, she's still pregnant with my child. Yes, she is. So what am I supposed to do? Abandon my own baby because its mother is a criminal? This was the question I had been dreading, the one that had no good answer. Daniel, I can't tell you what to do about Rebecca or the baby. Those are decisions you'll have to make as a man and as a father. But I can tell you what I'm going to do, which is I'm going to pursue every legal remedy available to me. Rebecca stole from me, humiliated me, and tried to destroy my relationship with you. I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen just because she's pregnant. Daniel nodded slowly, like he had expected this answer, but hoped for a different one. Will you at least wait until I get the background check results before you file charges, just so I know exactly what I'm dealing with? I looked at my son, this man I had raised and loved and sacrificed everything, for asking me for one more favor, one more delay, one more chance to fix the unfixable. The old Margaret would have said yes without hesitation. The old Margaret would have put his comfort above her own justice, would have risked her own financial security to spare him additional pain. But the old Margaret was dead buried somewhere between the church kitchen and Patricia Morrison's manila envelope. I'll give you 48 hours, I said. If your investigator confirms that Rebecca has been lying about her past, then I proceed with charges immediately. If he somehow proves that Patricia Morrison fabricated all that evidence, then we'll discuss other options. Thank you, Mom. Don't thank me yet, Daniel, because either way I want my money back, every penny. Whether Rebecca is a career criminal or just a woman who made some very bad choices she still stole from me. And I'm done pretending that love means letting people steal from you. Daniel left that night looking like a man carrying an impossible burden. And maybe he was. Maybe there was no good choice when you discovered that the mother of your unborn child was a manipulative thief who had targeted your family like a predator selecting prey. But that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. For the first time in 3 years, I was going to focus on protecting myself instead of sacrificing myself. And if that made me a bad mother in Daniel's eyes, then perhaps it was time for both of us to redefine what good motherhood actually meant. The next evening couldn't come fast enough. The 48 hours crawled by like weeks. I found myself checking my phone obsessively, jumping at every notification, waiting for Daniel to call with news that would either vindicate my decision or force me to confront the possibility that I had become a paranoid woman, destroying her son's marriage over wedding seating arrangements and credit card confusion. But deep down, I knew Patricia Morrison had been telling the truth. You don't fabricate that level of documentation, that many photographs, that intricate a timeline of destruction. Rebecca was exactly what Patricia had said she was, a predator who had perfected the art of bleeding families dry while positioning herself as the victim. The call came at 6:47 p.m. on Wednesday evening. Daniel's voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of a man who had just watched his entire world collapse. Mom, can you come over? I need to show you something. 20 minutes later, I stood in the living room of the apartment I had helped Daniel furnish, looking at a coffee table covered with documents that would have made Patricia Morrison's evidence seem minimal by comparison. The private investigator had been thorough, criminally thorough. Daniel sat on the couch like a broken man, his wedding ring sitting on the table beside a stack of papers that chronicled his wife's career as a professional victim. "Her real name is Rebecca Ann Morrison," he said without looking up. "She's never been Rebecca Henderson. Diana and William Henderson aren't her parents. They're her aunt and uncle who took her in after her actual parents died in a car accident when she was 16. I picked up one of the documents, a marriage certificate from Clark County, Nevada, dated 3 years earlier. She's been married 3 times, not twice like Patricia said. The investigator found a marriage in Vegas that lasted 6 weeks before the guy figured out she was stealing from his business accounts. Each page I turned revealed new layers of deception: credit card fraud charges in 2 states, a bankruptcy filing that listed over $200,000 in debts, restraining orders filed by 2 different ex-fiancés. "Daniel," I said quietly, "how far along is she really?" "5 months, not 3 like she told everyone, which means she was already pregnant when we got engaged." The engagement that had happened 8 months ago, after they had been dating for only 4 months. Rebecca had locked down her latest mark with remarkable efficiency. "She planned this entire thing," Daniel continued, his voice hollow. "The accidental meeting at the coffee shop where she spilled her drink on me. She'd been following me for 2 weeks, learning my routine. The investigator found photos on her phone, pictures of me leaving work, going to the gym, having lunch with friends. She stalked me." I sank into the chair across from him, overwhelmed by the scope of Rebecca's manipulation. "Where is she now?" "Gone. I confronted her with this evidence 2 hours ago, and she didn't even try to deny it. She just packed a bag and left. Said I'd never find her, never see my child, never be able to prove any of it in court." "Did she take anything?" Daniel's laugh was bitter and broken. "Everything she could carry: jewelry, electronics, cash. She cleaned out our joint checking account before she left. $12,000 that was supposed to be our emergency fund." $12,000 that Daniel probably didn't have, that had likely come from wedding gift money or credit cards or loans he couldn't afford. "Daniel, I'm sorry. I know this is devastating, but don't." His voice cut through my attempt at comfort like a blade. "Don't apologize for being right. Don't apologize for trying to protect me from someone I was too stupid and arrogant to see clearly." He finally looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was a small child. Complete vulnerability, the desperate need for someone to tell him everything would be okay. "Mom, I'm ruined. Financially, emotionally, completely ruined. The wedding cost you $90,000, but it cost me everything else. I took out loans to pay for the honeymoon, the apartment, the furniture. I quit my job 3 months ago because Rebecca convinced me to start a consulting business that was supposed to make us rich. I don't even have health insurance anymore, so." The consulting business that had never existed, just like everything else about Rebecca's promises for their future together. "I owe $43,000 on credit cards. I've got a car loan, student loans, and a lease on this apartment that I can't afford without Rebecca's supposed income from her supposed job that never actually existed." Each number hit me like a physical blow, not because of the money, but because of what it represented: my son's complete financial destruction, orchestrated by a woman who had seen him coming from a mile away. "And the worst part," Daniel continued, his voice breaking, "is that she's carrying my child. My baby is going to be raised by a woman who destroys people for a living, and there's nothing I can do about it." I moved to the couch beside him, and for the first time in months, Daniel didn't stiffen when I put my arm around his shoulders. "We'll figure this out," I said, falling back into old patterns of maternal problem-solving despite everything that had happened. How do we figure out something like this? She's going to disappear, maybe change her name again, and I'll never see my child. Or worse, she'll come back in a few years and demand child support from money I don't have while she's busy destroying some other family." The magnitude of Rebecca's destruction was staggering, but as I sat there holding my broken son, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry at him anymore. The rage that had sustained me for the past week, the fury that had driven me to lawyers and private investigators and threats of criminal prosecution, had evaporated. Daniel hadn't been complicit in Rebecca's schemes. He had been her victim just as much as I had been, maybe more so because his victimization would continue for the rest of his life through the child she was carrying. Daniel, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes that made him look like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I love you. I have always loved you, and I will always love you. What happened at the wedding, the money, all of it, none of that changes the fact that you are my son, and I would do anything to protect you. But I let her hurt you. I sat there and watched her humiliate you, and I didn't do anything to stop it. Because you didn't know. You thought you were protecting your wife from your difficult mother, not enabling a criminal to abuse her victim. I should have known. I should have seen the signs, should have questioned things that didn't make sense. Maybe he should have, but saying so wouldn't help either of us now. Daniel, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. When you think about your marriage to Rebecca, when you strip away all the lies and manipulation and pretense, was there ever a moment when you were genuinely happy, not excited about the idea of being married, not relieved to have found someone, but actually genuinely happy with who she was as a person? He was quiet for a long time, thinking about a question that probably should have been asked months earlier. No, he said finally. I was happy about the idea of her, about the future I thought we were building together, but the actual day-to-day reality of being with Rebecca was exhausting. She was always creating drama, always finding reasons to be upset about something, always needing me to prove my love by doing things that made me uncomfortable. Like what? Like cutting off friends she didn't like spending money we didn't have on things she wanted, like lying to you about our finances so you wouldn't worry. You lied to me about your finances. She said you'd try to control us if you knew I was struggling, that you'd make the wedding about your money instead of about our love. She convinced me that protecting her from your interference was the mature thing to do. Every revelation felt like another layer of Rebecca's manipulation being peeled away, exposing the calculated precision with which she had isolated Daniel from anyone who might have seen through her act. Daniel, I need you to understand something. The woman you married is a sociopath, not someone who's a little selfish or immature, an actual sociopath who is incapable of feeling genuine emotion for other people. Everything she did, every moment of your relationship was calculated to extract maximum benefit from you and your family. But she's pregnant with my child. Yes, she is. And that child is going to need at least one parent who isn't a predator. And we sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the enormity of what lay ahead. A custody battle against a woman who would lie under oath without hesitation, a child who would be born into a world of deception and manipulation, a son who would have to rebuild his entire life while fighting for the right to protect his own baby. Mom, Daniel said quietly, I know I have no right to ask this after everything I've put you through, but I need your help. 6 months ago, I would have said yes immediately, would have opened my checkbook and my heart without question. But the woman sitting on that couch had learned the difference between helping someone and enabling their destruction. What kind of help? I need a lawyer, a good one. If Rebecca disappears with my child, I need someone who can find her and force her into court. And if she doesn't disappear, if she decides to stay and bleed me dry through child support and custody manipulation, I need someone who can protect me from her. That's not going to be cheap. I know, I can't afford it. I can't afford anything anymore. Here it was, the moment I had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. My son was asking me to fund another battle to open my wallet again for a problem that wouldn't exist if he had listened to my concerns about Rebecca in the first place. But this wasn't the same as paying for a wedding or covering his credit card bills. This was about protecting an innocent child from a woman who would use that baby as a weapon against anyone who threatened her ability to extract money from new victims. I'll pay for the lawyer, I said, but there are conditions. Daniel nodded eagerly. Anything. First, you move back home with me. You're not financially stable enough to live on your own right now, and I'm not going to fund your independence while you're carrying this much debt. Okay. Second, you get a job. Any job. I don't care if it's stocking shelves or delivering pizza. You work, you pay down your debts, and you contribute to the household expenses. Of course. Third, we do this together. No more secrets, no more lies, no more protecting me from information I need to make decisions. If you want my help, you treat me like a partner, not like a bank. Yes, absolutely. And fourth, I said, meeting his eyes directly, you never ever allow another woman to treat me the way Rebecca did. I don't care if you fall in love with a saint or marry Mother Teresa herself. Nobody gets to humiliate me in my own family ever again. Never, I promise. I believed him partly because he was broken enough to mean it, and partly because he had finally seen what happened when love wasn't balanced with respect. Okay then. Tomorrow we call Sandra Kellerman and have her recommend a family attorney who specializes in cases involving parental alienation and fraud. That night, Daniel slept in his old bedroom for the first time in 3 years. I lay in my own bed listening to the familiar sounds of someone else in the house, footsteps in the hallway, water running in the guest bathroom, the soft murmur of the television downstairs. It felt like stepping backward in time, but also like moving forward into something new. Not the old relationship where I gave everything and asked for nothing in return, but a partnership between two adults who had both learned expensive lessons about the difference between love and exploitation. The next morning brought the first test of our new dynamic. Daniel came downstairs dressed for job interviews, his hair cut short, and his attitude more serious than I had seen since Robert's funeral. I called 3 temp agencies, he said over coffee. I have interviews this afternoon with all of them. I know it's not glamorous, but I need to start earning money immediately. Temporary work is honest work. Your father would be proud of you for doing whatever it takes to support your family. Do you think he would have liked Rebecca? The question caught me off guard, partly because it required me to imagine Robert's reaction to the woman who had nearly destroyed his family. Your father was an excellent judge of character. He would have seen through her act immediately. Would he have tried to warn me? Oh, sweetheart, he would have done more than warn you. Robert would have hired his own private investigator the first time Rebecca asked you to lie to me about money. Daniel smiled for the first time in days. He never did like it when people tried to manipulate his family. No, he didn't. Your father believed that family members should protect each other, not enable each other's worst decisions. And we were interrupted by my phone ringing, Sandra Kellerman returning my call about family law attorneys. Margaret, I found someone perfect for Daniel's situation. Catherine Walsh specializes in high-conflict custody cases involving parental alienation and financial fraud. She's expensive, but she's also ruthless when she needs to be. How expensive? Probably $15,000 to $20,000 to start, depending on how complicated Rebecca makes this process. I looked at Daniel, who was listening to my side of the conversation with the expression of a man calculating costs he couldn't afford. Sandra, have her call me today. We need to get this started before Rebecca has time to disappear completely. After I hung up, Daniel shook his head in amazement. Mom, I can't let you spend another $20,000 on my problems. It's not your problem, Daniel. It's our problem. That baby is going to be my grandchild, and I'm not going to let Rebecca use him or her as leverage to destroy what's left of this family. But you've already spent so much. Daniel, stop. The money I spent on your wedding was wasted because it was based on lies and manipulation. The money I'm going to spend on this lawyer is an investment in protecting an innocent child from a woman who will use that baby to hurt people. There's a difference. He nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. You're not doing this for me. You're doing this for your grandchild. I'm doing this for all of us. For you, for the baby, and for me. because I'll be damned if I'm going to let Rebecca Morrison Henderson Langley, whatever she's calling herself, now destroy 3 generations of this family. The lawyer's office was intimidating in the way that expensive legal help always is. Mahogany furniture, leather-bound books, diplomas and awards covering the walls like evidence of competence. Catherine Walsh looked like she could prosecute war crimes before lunch and negotiate international treaties after dinner. "I've reviewed the evidence you provided," she said without preamble, "and I have to say this is one of the most comprehensive cases of domestic fraud I've encountered." She spread Rebecca's criminal history across her conference table like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. "The good news is that we have extensive documentation of Rebecca's pattern of behavior, which will help us establish that she's an unfit parent. The bad news is that she's very good at disappearing when legal pressure mounts." "What does that mean for Daniel's chances of getting custody?" I asked. "It means we need to move fast, file for emergency custody based on abandonment, get court orders for child support and medical decision-making, establish paternity through the courts so she can't claim the baby isn't his." Daniel looked overwhelmed. "What if she's already left the state? Then we pursue her across state lines. I have colleagues in every major city who specialize in tracking down parents who violate custody orders." The legal strategy was complex and expensive, but it was also our only hope of protecting Daniel's child from a woman who would use that baby as a weapon for the next 18 years. "There's one more thing," Catherine said, pulling out another folder. "I did some additional research on Rebecca's financial history. In every previous relationship, she's filed for child support or alimony, even when the marriages were brief or fraudulent. She's essentially running a serial marriage scam. Get pregnant quickly, establish financial dependency, then extract payments for years after the relationship ends. So even if Daniel gets custody, she could still demand support payments. She'll try, but given her criminal history and the evidence of fraud, we can probably limit her financial claims significantly." We spent 2 hours planning a legal strategy that felt like preparing for war, because that's exactly what it was, a war against a woman who had turned family relationships into profit centers, who had weaponized pregnancy and motherhood in service of financial extraction. As we left Catherine's office, Daniel was quiet, processing the reality of what lay ahead. "Mom," he said as we got into my car, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay. Do you think I'll ever see my child?" The question hung between us like a sword, sharp and dangerous and impossible to ignore. "I think," I said carefully, "that Catherine Walsh is going to do everything legally possible to make sure you have a relationship with your baby, but I also think Rebecca is going to make it as difficult and expensive as possible. So we might win, but it's going to cost us everything." "Daniel, look at me." He turned in his seat and I saw Robert's eyes looking back at me, the same deep brown, the same intelligence, the same capacity for both love and stubbornness. "Your father and I brought you home to this family 25 years ago, and we loved you every single day since then. Sometimes that love looked like saying yes to things you wanted, and sometimes it looked like saying no to things that would hurt you. But it was always, always love. I know that. That baby is going to be part of this family too. And if Rebecca thinks she can use our grandchild to manipulate us or extract money from us or punish us for refusing to be victims, she's about to learn that she picked the wrong family to mess with." For the first time since this nightmare began, Daniel smiled with something that looked like hope. "She has no idea who she's dealing with, does she?" "No, sweetheart, she doesn't. Rebecca Morrison specialized in targeting weak families, people who would sacrifice anything to avoid conflict. But we're not weak anymore. We're angry, we're unified, and we have excellent legal representation. What if she disappears with the baby? Then we'll find her. Catherine has resources I didn't even know existed: private investigators, federal databases, international tracking systems. If Rebecca thinks she can vanish with our grandchild, she's about to discover that modern technology makes disappearing a lot harder than it used to be. As we drove home, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with Daniel. For 25 years, I had been his mother first and myself second. I had absorbed his problems, solved his crises, and sacrificed my own needs to ensure his happiness. But the woman driving home from the lawyer's office was nobody's victim. She was a grandmother preparing to fight for her family, a mother who had finally learned that protecting her son sometimes meant saying no to his demands, and a woman who had discovered that love without boundaries wasn't love at all. It was just another form of abuse. Rebecca Morrison Henderson Langley had made one critical miscalculation when she targeted our family. She had assumed that our capacity for love made us weak, that our willingness to sacrifice made us vulnerable, that our desire for peace made us pushovers. She was about to learn the difference between loving someone and being a doormat for them. And if she thought pregnancy was going to shield her from the consequences of her actions, she was about to get a very expensive education in what happened when you declared war on a family that had finally learned how to fight back. The battle for Daniel's child was about to begin, and we were going in armed with legal firepower, unlimited determination, and nothing left to lose. Rebecca had spent years perfecting the art of destruction. Now it was our turn. 3 months passed before we heard from Rebecca again, and when we did, it was exactly the kind of calculated strike I had been expecting. Catherine Walsh called on a Tuesday morning, her voice carrying the particular tension that lawyers develop when delivering bad news. Margaret Rebecca's surfaced. She's filed for child support in Nevada, claiming Daniel abandoned her and the baby. She's demanding $5,000 a month plus medical expenses. I was in my kitchen making breakfast for Daniel, who had been working double shifts at a warehouse job to pay down his credit card debt. The normalcy of scrambled eggs and coffee felt surreal against the backdrop of Catherine's words. She had the baby, though, 3 weeks ago, a daughter. She's named her Emma Patricia Morrison. Notice she's using Morrison now, not Langley, and she's claiming Daniel has never attempted to contact her or support the child. Bull. Daniel walked into the kitchen at that moment, saw my expression, and immediately knew we had news about Rebecca. He poured himself coffee and sat down, his face already resigned to whatever fresh hell his ex-wife had unleashed. Put Catherine on speaker, he said quietly. Daniel, I'm going to be direct with you. Catherine's voice filled the kitchen with the authority of expensive legal expertise. Rebecca has been very busy. She's established residency in Nevada, found herself a legal aid attorney, and built a case that portrays you as a deadbeat father who abandoned his pregnant wife. But I tried to find her. Daniel's voice cracked with frustration. I hired investigators. I filed missing person reports. I did everything I could to locate her after she disappeared. I know that, and we have documentation of your efforts, but Nevada is a different jurisdiction, and Rebecca's gotten there first with her version of events. I watched my son's shoulders slump as the reality hit him. Even from 1,000 miles away, even after months of silence, Rebecca could still reach out and destroy his life with a single legal filing. What's our next move? I asked. We counterfile in California for full custody based on abandonment and fraud. We present evidence of Rebecca's criminal history and demand that any child support be calculated based on accurate financial information, not the inflated numbers she's claiming. What inflated numbers? Daniel asked. She's telling the Nevada court that you earn $90,000 a year and have substantial family wealth. She's claiming you deliberately took a low-paying job to avoid support obligations. The irony was breathtaking. Rebecca was using my financial capacity to justify bleeding Daniel dry, positioning my ability to help my son as evidence that he should be forced to pay her more money. So she's essentially demanding that I pay child support based on money that isn't mine. Exactly. It's a common tactic among manipulative ex-spouses. They argue that access to family money constitutes income, therefore support should be calculated accordingly. I felt the familiar rage building in my chest, but this time it was different. focused, purposeful. Rebecca had made another critical miscalculation. She thought our family's resources would make us vulnerable to her demands, when in fact they made us uniquely positioned to fight back. Catherine, what would it cost to fight this properly? Not just defend against her claims, but go on the offensive. Pursue full custody, demand accountability for the fraud, make sure she faces consequences for what she's done. We're talking about a multi-state custody battle that could last months or even years. Between attorney fees, investigator costs, court expenses, and expert witnesses, you're probably looking at $50,000 to $75,000. Daniel's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as he set it down. Mom, no. I can't let you spend that kind of money. Maybe we should just try to negotiate something reasonable with Rebecca's lawyer. Negotiate what Daniel she stole from us, defrauded us, abandoned you, and now she wants to be paid for the privilege of keeping your daughter away from you. What exactly is reasonable about any of that? But $75,000 is less than what I spent on your wedding, and this time I'm not paying for a fantasy. I'm investing in reality. The reality is that you have a daughter who needs to be protected from a woman who will use her as a weapon for the next 18 years unless we stop her now. Catherine's voice came through the speaker with professional clarity. Margaret, I need you to understand what we're up against. Rebecca isn't just demanding money. She's building a case to ensure Daniel never has meaningful access to his child. The support calculations are designed to be so onerous that he'll never be financially stable enough to fight for custody. Explain. $5,000 a month in child support plus medical expenses would consume Daniel's entire income from his current job. He'd be forced to rely on you for basic living expenses, which Rebecca would then use as evidence that he's financially irresponsible and dependent on others. The trap was elegant in its cruelty. Rebecca was trying to engineer a situation where Daniel would be simultaneously broke and portrayed as wealthy, financially dependent on his mother, but legally responsible for payments he couldn't afford. Meanwhile, Catherine continued, she'd be receiving enough money to live comfortably without working, all while claiming to be a struggling single mother who was abandoned by her wealthy ex-husband's family. I looked at Daniel, who was staring into his coffee cup like it contained answers to impossible questions. What kind of visitation is she proposing? Supervised visits in Nevada, no overnight stays until Emma is 5 years old, and no visits at all if child support payments are more than 30 days late. So she gets to hold his daughter hostage while bleeding him financially. That's the plan, and if Daniel can't make payments, she gets to tell Emma that her father chose money over her. The psychology of Rebecca's strategy was as devastating as its financial implications. She wasn't just stealing money, she was systematically destroying any possibility of Daniel having a real relationship with his daughter while ensuring that Emma would grow up believing her father had abandoned her. Catherine, I said, my voice steady, with a decision that had crystallized somewhere between scrambled eggs and the realization that Rebecca was prepared to destroy an innocent child to maintain her lifestyle. I want you to file for emergency custody in California. I want depositions from every one of Rebecca's previous victims. I want her financial records subpoenaed and her criminal history presented in court. I want a psychological evaluation that will expose her for what she is. Mom, Daniel started to protest. No, this stops here, Daniel. Emma is 3 weeks old right now, which means she has 18 years ahead of her with Rebecca as her primary influence. 18 years of being taught that family relationships are transactional, that love is conditional on financial benefit, that manipulating people is how you survive in the world. I stood up from the kitchen table, pacing to the window that overlooked the garden Robert and I had planted together. Your daughter's going to learn about relationships from watching how her mother treats her father. Right now, Rebecca is teaching her that men exist to be exploited, that families can be destroyed for profit, that pregnancy and motherhood are weapons to be used against anyone who dares to expect honesty and respect. But what if we lose? What if we spend all that money and still end up with nothing? I turned back to face my son, this man who had been broken and rebuilt over the past few months into someone I was finally proud to call family. Then we'll have lost fighting instead of lost surrendering, and Emma will grow up knowing that her father's family fought for her, even if they couldn't save her. Catherine's voice came through the speaker with something that sounded almost like excitement. Margaret, if you're serious about this, I need to warn you that we're not just fighting Rebecca. We're going up against a system that tends to favor mothers, especially mothers who present themselves as victims. Then we make sure the court sees who the real victim is, a 3-week-old baby who's being raised by a woman who destroyed every relationship she's ever had for financial gain. The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal preparation that felt like planning for war. Catherine assembled a team of experts, forensic accountants to trace Rebecca's financial crimes, psychologists to evaluate her mental state, private investigators to document her pattern of behavior across multiple states. The discovery process revealed details about Rebecca's past that made even Catherine's experienced team uncomfortable. Bank records showing systematic theft from every man she had ever dated, social media posts documenting her calculated approach to target selection, email conversations with friends where she bragged about her ability to land rich guys and bleed them dry. But the most devastating evidence came from Marcus Thompson, Rebecca's second ex-husband, who agreed to testify about his experience with her manipulation tactics. She told me she was pregnant 3 weeks after we met, Marcus said during his deposition, his voice carrying the weariness of a man who had survived psychological warfare. Said it was an accident that she was on birth control, but it failed. I was young and stupid and thought I was doing the right thing by marrying her. What happened after the marriage? She miscarried 2 weeks later, or claimed she did. I never saw medical records, never went to doctor appointments with her. But she was devastated, said we needed to try again right away to heal from the loss. Did she get pregnant again? Not while we were married. But 6 months after our divorce was final, she contacted me claiming I was the father of her son and demanding child support. When I demanded a paternity test, she disappeared. The pattern was becoming clear. Rebecca used pregnancy as a tool for manipulation, whether the pregnancies were real or fabricated. She would claim to be carrying a man's child to trap him into marriage, then use the emotional leverage of motherhood to extract financial support, even after the relationships ended. Marcus, Catherine asked gently, what made you finally realize what Rebecca was doing? My mother hired a private investigator after Rebecca started demanding access to my inheritance. The investigator found 2 other men who had similar experiences with her: whirlwind romances, quick pregnancies, expensive weddings funded by the men's families, followed by financial devastation and mysterious miscarriages. What happened to those men? One of them lost his house. The other one declared bankruptcy and moved back in with his parents. Both of them were told they were the fathers of children that either didn't exist or weren't theirs. I listened to Marcus's testimony with growing horror, not just at what Rebecca had done to him, but at the realization that Daniel and Emma might be just the latest victims in a pattern that stretched back years. Marcus, do you believe Rebecca was actually pregnant when she left Daniel? I hope so for that baby's sake, because if she's faking this pregnancy too, then she's planning something even worse than usual. That night, Daniel and I sat in my living room going through the depositions and evidence that Catherine's team had assembled. The scope of Rebecca's crimes was staggering, but so was the realization of how close we had come to enabling her complete destruction of our family. Mom, Daniel said quietly, what if Emma isn't really mine? The question had been lurking in the back of my mind for weeks, but hearing it spoken out loud made it real in a way that was both terrifying and potentially liberating. Then we'll deal with that when we know for sure. But Daniel, even if Emma is your biological daughter, that doesn't mean Rebecca gets to hold her hostage. What do you mean, but I mean that being a biological parent doesn't give someone the right to abuse and manipulate. Rebecca being Emma's mother doesn't make her a good mother, and it doesn't mean we have to enable her destruction of that little girl's life. My phone buzzed with a text message from Catherine. Rebecca's attorney wants to discuss a settlement. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Settlement discussions usually meant the other side was getting nervous, but with Rebecca, it could just as easily mean she was preparing to launch a new round of psychological warfare. Catherine thinks Rebecca wants to negotiate. I told Daniel that's good, right? With Rebecca, nothing is good or bad, it just is what it is, another manipulation designed to get what she wants while minimizing her own accountability. The next morning, Catherine's conference room felt like a neutral zone in an active war. Rebecca's legal aid attorney, a earnest young woman named Jennifer Clark, spread out settlement proposals that read like ransom demands. My client is willing to accept a lump sum payment of $200,000 in lieu of ongoing child support, Jennifer announced, with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. The number hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. $200,000, Catherine repeated slowly. For a client who stole money, committed fraud, and abandoned her husband immediately after their wedding. My client was the victim of financial abuse and emotional manipulation. The Henderson family, the Morrison family, you mean, or the Thompson family, or whichever name your client is using this week. Jennifer's confident expression flickered slightly. I'm not sure what you're implying. Catherine opened a folder and began spreading out photographs, court documents, and criminal records like playing cards. I'm implying that your client is a career criminal who has been running marriage scams for at least 5 years. I'm implying that she targeted Daniel Langley specifically because she knew his family had money. And I'm implying that the child she claims is his may not exist at all. That's ridiculous. Emma Patricia Morrison was born 3 weeks ago at Sunrise Hospital in Las Vegas. I have the birth certificate right here. Catherine examined the document with the attention of someone who had seen too many forged papers. Interesting. The birth certificate lists no father, and it's signed by a midwife rather than a doctor. No medical records, no hospital bracelet, no photographs of Rebecca actually pregnant. Are you suggesting my client faked a pregnancy? I'm suggesting that your client has faked pregnancies before and that a birth certificate from Nevada is remarkably easy to obtain with the right connections and the right amount of money. Jennifer looked like she was beginning to understand that her client might have provided less than complete information about her past. Even if there were irregularities in Rebecca's previous relationships, that doesn't change the fact that she has a newborn daughter who needs financial support. Then she'll have no problem submitting to a paternity test, Catherine said smoothly. DNA testing supervised by the court with results provided to both legal teams simultaneously. The silence that followed was deafening. My client has concerns about the invasive nature of genetic testing on such a young infant. Of course she does, because if Emma isn't Daniel's daughter, then this entire proceeding is another fraud designed to extract money from a family your client has already victimized. I watched Jennifer Clark's professional composure crumble as she realized that her client had probably lied to her about everything, and that she was now sitting in a conference room defending a woman who had made her an unwitting accessory to extortion. I need to consult with my client about the paternity test, Jennifer said finally. You do that, Catherine replied. And while you're consulting, you might want to ask her about Marcus Thompson, James Patterson, and David Chen. Ask her about the previous paternity claims, the forged medical records, and the pattern of financial fraud that stretches across 3 states. After Jennifer left, Catherine turned to Daniel and me with an expression that was part triumph and part concern. We've got them on the run, but that makes Rebecca more dangerous, not less. Cornered predators tend to lash out in unpredictable ways. What do you think she'll do? Honestly, I think she'll disappear again. The demand for a paternity test probably terrified her, especially if Emma isn't Daniel's child. And if Emma is his daughter, Then Rebecca will use that baby as leverage for the next 18 years unless we stop her now. The answer came 2 days later in the form of a phone call that would change everything. Catherine's voice was tight with controlled fury when she called Friday afternoon. Margaret, we've got a problem. Rebecca never had a baby. I sank into my kitchen chair, the words not quite making sense. What do you mean, Sup? I mean, our investigators tracked down the midwife who supposedly delivered Emma, and she's never heard of Rebecca Morrison. The birth certificate is a forgery. There is no Emma Patricia Morrison. Daniel had just walked in from work, and I could see him processing Catherine's words with the expression of someone who had been punched in the stomach. So, Rebecca was never pregnant. Oh, she was pregnant. Hospital records from 6 months ago confirm that, but she had an abortion in her second trimester and has been faking the rest of the pregnancy to extort money from your family. The room spun around me as I tried to process the implications. Rebecca had terminated her pregnancy with Daniel's child, then spent months manipulating him with the promise of fatherhood, all while planning to extract hundreds of thousands of dollars for a baby that didn't exist. Where is she now? Gone, disappeared from her Nevada apartment 2 days ago, right after we demanded the paternity test. But she's already moved on to her next target. How do you know? Because she's engaged to a man in Phoenix whose mother just died and left him a substantial inheritance. My colleagues in Arizona say she's already claiming to be pregnant with his child. I looked at Daniel, who was sitting at my kitchen table with his head in his hands, and I felt something break inside me that I didn't know could break. She killed my grandchild, I said quietly. Margaret. She killed Daniel's baby and then tried to extort money from us by pretending the child was still alive. The enormity of Rebecca's evil was beyond anything I had imagined. This wasn't just fraud or manipulation. This was a level of psychological cruelty that suggested someone completely devoid of human empathy. What do we do now? Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Catherine's response was immediate and definitive. We file criminal charges in every jurisdiction where she's committed fraud. We provide evidence to law enforcement in Arizona to protect her next victim, and we make sure that Rebecca Morrison never again has the opportunity to destroy a family the way she destroyed yours. Over the following weeks, Catherine's legal team worked with law enforcement agencies in 4 states to build criminal cases against Rebecca. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, forged documents, testimony from multiple victims, a pattern of behavior that stretched back years. But Rebecca had vanished as completely as if she had never existed, leaving behind only the wreckage of the family's mother she had destroyed and a trail of debt that would take Daniel years to pay off. The man in Phoenix was luckier than we had been. Warned by Arizona authorities, he ended their engagement and cut off all contact before Rebecca could access his inheritance. But she had already moved on to her next target, a widowed father in Colorado who was vulnerable in all the ways that made him perfect prey for someone like Rebecca. 3 months after the criminal charges were filed, I got a call from a detective in Denver. Rebecca Morrison Henderson Langley Patterson had been arrested trying to board a plane to Mexico with $50,000 in cash stolen from her latest victim's business accounts. Mrs. Langley, I wanted to let you know that Rebecca Morrison has been charged with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. She's looking at 10 to 15 years in prison. Will she actually serve that time? If convicted, yes, the evidence against her is overwhelming, and she's got victims in multiple states willing to testify. This woman is going away for a long time. That evening, Daniel and I sat in my backyard watching the sun set over the garden that Robert and I had planted together. The roses were blooming again, their petals deep red in the fading light, and I thought about growth and renewal and the strange ways that destruction sometimes clears the ground for something better. Mom, Daniel said quietly, I need to tell you something. What's that, sweetheart? I'm glad she's not pregnant anymore. The words should have shocked me, but they didn't. They felt like truth, honest and complicated and completely understandable. I know that makes me a terrible person, as he continued, but I'm relieved that there's no baby being raised by that woman. I'm relieved that I don't have to spend the next 18 years fighting for a child who would have been used as a weapon against our family. That doesn't make you terrible, Daniel. That makes you realistic about what Rebecca was capable of doing to an innocent child. But I lost my baby. Yes, you did. And I lost my grandchild. And we're both going to grieve that loss in our own ways. We sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the garden, two people who had survived a war and were finally beginning to understand what peace felt like. What happens now? Daniel asked. Now we rebuild. You pay off your debts, I pay off the equity loan, and we figure out what our family looks like when it's not being held hostage by someone who doesn't belong in it. And if I ever want to date again, I laughed, surprising myself with the sound, then you bring her to dinner so I can meet her. And if she suggests seating me in the kitchen, you'll know to run. Daniel smiled, and I saw Robert's eyes looking back at me, the same warmth, the same intelligence, the same capacity for both love and wisdom that had attracted me to his father 28 years earlier. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. 6 months later, I hosted a dinner party in my dining room, the same room where I had planned Daniel's wedding, where I had agonized over seating charts and menu choices and flowers that would photograph beautifully. But this time, the guests were people who actually wanted to be there, women who had become my chosen family during the months when my biological family was falling apart. Joyce was there, of course, along with Patricia Morrison, who had become an unlikely friend bonded by our shared experience of Rebecca's manipulation. Catherine Walsh came with her husband, and Sandra Kellerman brought her daughter, who was home from college. We raised our glasses to toast not a wedding, but freedom, freedom from the belief that love required endless sacrifice, freedom from the idea that family meant accepting abuse, freedom from the notion that being a good mother meant being a doormat for ungrateful children. To women who gave everything and were told it wasn't enough, I said, looking around the table at faces that reflected strength and wisdom and hard-earned peace. To those of us who learned to reclaim our seats at the head of our own tables, the glasses clinked with the sound of celebration, and I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't erased from my own life. I wasn't invisible in my own home. I wasn't funding someone else's happiness at the expense of my own dignity. I was Margaret Langley, survivor of financial fraud and emotional manipulation, mother of a son who had finally learned the difference between love and exploitation, and grandmother to a child who would never exist, but whose absence had taught us more about family than her presence ever could have. Rebecca Morrison was in prison paying the price for years of destruction and manipulation. Daniel was working 2 jobs and slowly rebuilding his credit and his self-respect, and I was sitting at the head of my own table surrounded by people who valued my presence instead of my checkbook. By the end of the evening, I wasn't the woman who had been banished to a kitchen chair at her son's wedding. I wasn't the victim who had paid for her own erasure. I was finally the main character in my own life, and it had only cost me everything I thought I knew about love, family, and the price of being needed. But some lessons are worth the tuition no matter how expensive they are.